I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and meet the right people.
You know, I was engaged to a man named Bernie Taupin, who's Elton's lyricist.
At 77 years old, Don Henley, the voice behind some of the most unforgettable songs in rock history, has finally confessed that this one woman was and is the love of his life. Through the whirlwind of fame, the dizzying highs and crushing lows of the music world, and a string of high-profile romances that made headlines around the world, it turns out the love of his life was never the loudest story told. It was the quiet, steady bond he built away from the spotlight. To say that Don Henley has had a rich love life would be an understatement. Well, you can't ever quit on love. Let's dive into Henley's love life to see how he eventually met his true match. First love and heartbreak with Lori Rodkin. In 1974, Don Henley was a young man standing at the edge of something extraordinary. The Eagles had just released their first few albums, and while fame was beginning to trickle into his life, it had not yet devoured him completely. The world was starting to take notice of the band's unique blend of country rock and melancholic storytelling, but Henley's personal life remained something of a quiet storm until he crossed paths with Lori Rodkin. At the time, Lori worked behind the scenes at a music management company, immersed in the business side of an industry often characterized by hedonism and chaos. It was this very grounding, this calmness in the middle of the storm, that first drew Henley to her. Unlike so many others floating through the smoke-filled rooms of the Sunset Strip, Lori was not chasing the usual vices of the time. She wasn't interested in hard partying and didn't indulge in the relentless drinking or drug use that defined the era. In a city teeming with wild ambition and reckless abandon, Lori stood out, and for Henley, who was quickly learning how easy it was to get lost in the madness, her steadiness must have seemed like a beacon. It seemed like a match made in heaven. Alas, that's not how it unfolded. In any case, their relationship evolved quickly. Henley, barely in his late 20s, and Lori, close in age but already seasoned by the behind-the-scenes grind of the music business, decided to move in together. They chose Malibu, a then quieter, more secluded coastal haven compared to today's celebrity playground. Their home, perched along the rugged Pacific coast, offered the kind of peace and privacy that Henley desperately needed as his fame expanded. Yet, despite the genuine affection and connection they shared, the pressure cooker of Henley's skyrocketing career inevitably seeped into their relationship. By 1975, the Eagles were recording what would become One of These Nights, an album that marked their full embrace of a darker, more sophisticated sound. Henley was increasingly pulled away by recording sessions, press obligations, and the grueling demands of touring. Meanwhile, the temptations that Henley once viewed warily became harder to resist. Success often changes people. What had once been a simple, heartfelt bond between two people started to fracture under the weight of mistrust, insecurity, and the gravitational pull of an industry that was built to consume even the strongest souls. Their breakup, when it finally came, was not a clean, quiet parting. It was bitter, messy, and left emotional wreckage in its wake. Lori, heartbroken but fiercely independent, walked away. Henley began channeling his sorrow and regret into lyrics, many of which would form the emotional backbone of what would become one of the Eagles' greatest and most iconic albums, Hotel California. Wasted Time, for instance, became one of the emotional high points of Hotel California, and through it, Henley immortalized not just his heartbreak, but Lori's presence in his life. He didn't name her publicly, of course, but those close to the band and the inner circles of Los Angeles knew exactly who the muse was. In interviews years later, Henley would admit that much of the disillusionment, the themes of broken dreams, and crumbling facades that run through Hotel California were rooted in his personal experiences from this period, and a large part of that was his failed relationship with Lori Rodkin. As Henley and the Eagles soared to stratospheric levels of fame with Hotel California's release in 1976, Lori was forging a new path for herself. She did not ride on the coattails of her famous ex-boyfriend. Instead, she carved out her own identity, eventually becoming a renowned jewelry designer. Lori Rodkin's creations would later adorn some of the biggest names in Hollywood, including Madonna and Cher. But back in those post-breakup days, she was simply a young woman who had learned the hard way that proximity to fame often comes at an unbearable personal cost. She relocated from the musical epicenter of Malibu and Los Angeles to pursue her dreams quietly but relentlessly, choosing to focus on building something that was hers and hers alone. But Henley was not one to give up on love so quickly. Whirlwind romance with Stevie Nicks. By the mid-1970s, the music scene in Los Angeles was a swirling universe of genius, indulgence, heartbreak, and reinvention. It was in this electric atmosphere that a heartbroken Don Henley, reeling from his breakup, crossed paths with Stevie Nicks. Both were at pivotal points in their lives. Henley, by then, was one of the central creative forces behind the Eagles, riding the wave of success that albums like On the Border and One of These Nights had brought. Meanwhile, Stevie Nicks had joined Fleetwood Mac in late 1974, along with Lindsey Buckingham, and by 1975 the band was undergoing an extraordinary transformation, musically soaring even as its internal relationships crumbled. Against this backdrop of creative brilliance and personal chaos, Henley and Nicks found themselves drawn to one another. Their initial encounters were a mixture of professional admiration and personal chemistry. They moved in the same circles, recording studios, parties in Laurel Canyon, sprawling Malibu estates, and their bond formed quickly. Stevie, at 27 years old, was already becoming a cultural icon with her ethereal voice and bohemian fashion, while Henley, also 27, was building a reputation for himself as one of the era's most intelligent and introspective songwriters. Both were veterans of heartbreak and ambition, but perhaps it was their mutual understanding of what fame demanded and what it destroyed that forged the early intensity of their relationship. They would often spend late nights talking about everything from poetry and history to the burdens of being creative perfectionists. The relationship escalated with the kind of velocity that often comes when two people are carrying invisible wounds. For Stevie, the internal battles within Fleetwood Mac were brutal. Her relationship with Lindsey Buckingham, which had spanned years before they joined the band, was unraveling in the most public and painful ways. For Henley, the Eagles were nearing the apex of their commercial success, but at the cost of increasing personal alienation and the mounting pressures of constant touring and recording. Each offered the other a kind of temporary escape, a private world away from the studio battles, the heartbreaks, and the relentless glare of public attention. They spent much of their time at Henley's homes in Los Angeles and Malibu, and occasionally retreated to more private enclaves in the hills surrounding the city, seeking moments of calm amid the storm of their professional lives. By 1978, both Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles had become global phenomena, but at a personal cost that few could imagine. Henley was navigating the complex aftermath of Hotel California's unprecedented success, while Fleetwood Mac was riding the wave of Rumors, an album birthed from unimaginable interpersonal turmoil. During this time, Henley and Nicks's relationship deepened, and with that came both the beautiful highs and the devastating lows. In early 1979, Stevie became pregnant with Henley's child. Stevie, then about 30 years old, was at the peak of her career. Her solo ambitions were beginning to crystallize, and her schedule with Fleetwood Mac was relentless. The idea of motherhood, however emotionally compelling, seemed almost impossible. After much soul-searching, and with heavy hearts, Stevie decided to terminate the pregnancy. It was an agonizing choice, one that she would later say haunted her for years. For Henley, too, it was a crushing blow. Though they both understood the circumstances, the emotional fallout was devastating. Their relationship, already fragile under the weight of fame and circumstance, could not survive the grief and unspoken resentment that lingered after the pregnancy termination. The emotional aftermath of this period found its way into the music they created, particularly in Stevie's writing. Her song Sarah, which appeared on her 1981 solo debut, Belladonna, is perhaps the most haunting reflection of that lost chapter. In later interviews, Stevie admitted that part of Sarah was inspired by the name she would have given the child she conceived with Don Henley. The lyrics, filled with images of desert storms, lost dreams, and bittersweet memories, carry the ghost of the life that could have been. Henley himself confirmed in interviews that Stevie had told him the song was partly about their unborn child, lending an even deeper poignancy to a song already soaked in longing and regret. Despite the intense personal pain, Don Henley and Stevie Nicks managed something that most broken couples never achieve. They remained friends and collaborators. The deep respect they had for each other's artistry never waned, even when their romantic relationship ended. Throughout the 1980s and into the following decades, they would occasionally work together on musical projects. One notable collaboration was on Henley's 1989 hit Leather and Lace, which he originally intended to record with Stevie. Though she ultimately did not record the final version with him due to record label complications, Stevie had written the song during the height of their relationship. Henley often spoke with admiration for Stevie in the years that followed. He acknowledged her extraordinary resilience, her singular voice, and the way she carved out an identity in an industry that was often cruel to women. Stevie, likewise, would always speak of Henley with a kind of wistful affection, acknowledging him as one of the few men in her life who genuinely understood the sacrifices her career demanded. Their friendship endured even as the decades rolled on. In 2016, during an interview to promote his solo album Cass County, Henley was asked about Stevie. Without hesitation, he spoke warmly, recalling the connection they had shared and emphasizing the enduring bond that remained. Similarly, Stevie, who had by then been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with Fleetwood Mac and once as a solo artist, never hesitated to name Henley among the people she respected most deeply in the business. However, back in 1979, as the Eagles disbanded temporarily after the grueling sessions for the long run and Fleetwood Mac wrestled with the expectations following Tusk, Henley, and Nicks had long since moved out of each other's immediate orbit romantically, dating Bond girl Lois Childs. After the emotional turbulence of his relationship with Stevie Nicks came to a painful, Don Henley found himself at a crossroads, both personally and professionally. Then, in his early 30s, Henley needed a reprieve from the chaos that had defined much of his late 20s. It was during this period, around 1980, that he crossed paths with Lois Childs, a woman whose elegance, intelligence, and grounded demeanor offered something different from the world he had known with his musician peers. Lois, a native of Houston, Texas, was already a well-established figure in the worlds of modeling and acting, celebrated not only for her beauty, but for her sophistication and self-possession. Raised in an affluent Texas family, Lois had originally pursued a career in academia before an unexpected modeling opportunity in the late 1960s launched her into the upper echelons of New York's fashion scene. Signed by the prestigious Wilhelmina Models Agency, she quickly became a fixture in magazines like Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. But Lois wasn't content to be just a pretty face. By the mid-1970s, she had transitioned into acting, landing significant roles in films such as The Way We Were, opposite Robert Redford and Barbra Streisand, and later starring as the poised and unforgettable Dr. Holly Goodhead in the James Bond film Moonraker alongside Roger Moore. As Henley and Childs grew closer, their relationship blossomed relatively quietly compared to the media frenzy that had surrounded Henley's romance with Stevie Nicks. Lois was not part of the rock and roll circus. She wasn't seeking the limelight, nor was she driven by the same restless artistic temperament that characterized so many of Henley's former companions. Instead, she brought a sense of calm and decorum into his life, offering him a glimpse into a different way of living, one that valued privacy, balance, and restraint over the endless drama of fame. By the early 1980s, Don Henley was entering a new creative phase. With the Eagles officially disbanded in 1980 after the release of their live album, he turned his energy toward building his solo career. His debut solo album, I Can't Stand Still, was released in August 1982 and featured the hit Dirty Laundry, a biting commentary on media sensationalism. During the period leading up to and following this release, Lois Childs was a steady presence in his life. While Henley was crafting songs that reflected a deeper, more socially conscious worldview, Lois was continuing her own career, taking on film roles with a selective approach, including appearances in movies like 1987's Broadcast News and the miniseries Dallas in 1982. Their relationship lasted about 3 years, from around late 1979 or early 1980 until sometime in 1982 or early 1983. Unlike his previous romantic entanglements, which had been marked by intensity, public scrutiny, and emotional upheaval, Henley's time with Childs was refreshingly free of major drama. Friends of the couple would later remark on how much Henley seemed to mellow during those years, finding in Lois someone who could match his intellectual curiosity without demanding the emotional roller coaster that had characterized his previous loves. They would often retreat to quieter spaces, spending time at Henley's house in Malibu or attending intimate gatherings rather than the typical star-studded galas. While their relationship was undoubtedly meaningful to Henley, it eventually became clear that they were at different points in their lives and careers. Lois, having already experienced the highs and lows of both the modeling and acting industries, seemed less interested in the intense fame game that Henley was still deeply enmeshed in. Meanwhile, Henley's burgeoning solo career demanded more of his time and focus than ever before. With the success of I Can't Stand Still, followed by even bigger achievements with Building the Perfect Beast in 1984, Henley found himself consumed by the pressures of staying relevant in an evolving musical landscape that was increasingly defined by MTV and rapidly changing tastes. There was no explosive breakup between Don Henley and Lois Childs, no bitter songs, no public feuding. Instead, their relationship seemed to fade with a certain bittersweet inevitability, the way some relationships do when two people simply realize they are walking different paths. They parted amicably, maintaining a level of mutual respect that allowed both to move forward without the baggage of resentment or regret. Finding love again. Maren Jensen. After the graceful end of his relationship with Lois Child in the early 1980s, Don Henley found himself once again searching for deeper companionship. At that point, Henley was 34 years old, moving fully into his solo career after the Eagles' breakup in 1980. Amid the swelling Los Angeles creative scene, a blend of musicians, actors, and artists who often mingled at industry events, private parties, and studio gatherings, Henley crossed paths with a woman who would come to have a profound impact on both his personal life and his music. Maren Jensen. Born on September 23, 1956 in Arcadia, California, Maren was about 9 years Henley's junior. Despite her youth, she possessed a maturity and intelligence that set her apart from many of her contemporaries. After studying theater arts at UCLA, Maren captured widespread attention for her role as Lieutenant Athena in the original Battlestar Galactica series, which aired from 1978 to 1979. When Henley met Maren in the early 1980s, her acting career was winding down, partly due to health challenges. She had been battling the Epstein-Barr virus, a debilitating illness that sapped her energy and made the grueling schedules of Hollywood productions almost impossible to maintain. Yet it was perhaps this very moment of transition in her life that made their connection so poignant. Henley, also at a turning point, found in Maren a kindred spirit, someone who, like him, was searching for meaning beyond the relentless demands of fame. Their romance bloomed in the private spaces away from public scrutiny, nurtured by long conversations, shared dreams, and a mutual appreciation for artistic expression. Henley soon realized that Maren was not just a supportive partner, but also an artistic collaborator. As he began conceptualizing his first solo album, I Can't Stand Still, which would eventually be released on August 13, 1982, Maren became an integral part of the creative process. She offered more than emotional support. She actively contributed musically, providing backing vocals on tracks like Johnny Can't Read. Her voice, soft yet distinctive, layered subtly behind Henley's lead, adding texture and a sense of intimacy to the record. In interviews from that era, Henley would often reference the role Maren played, not only in encouraging his creative independence after the end of the Eagles, but in giving him the emotional steadiness needed to embark on such a daunting new chapter. Their relationship deepened rapidly, and soon they were inseparable, often seen together at charity events, studio sessions, and private gatherings in Malibu, where Henley had established his home. Friends and industry insiders regarded them as an ideal match, both attractive, intelligent, and artistically gifted. Around this time, Henley, who had often written about the cost of fame and the loss of innocence, seemed more at peace, less cynical. Maren's influence extended beyond his music and into his growing social consciousness. The early 1980s were a period when Henley became increasingly aware of environmental issues, a passion that Maren would later help channel into one of his most enduring legacies. By 1984, their bond had solidified to the point that engagement rumors swirled throughout the Los Angeles social scene. While they kept the details of their relationship largely private, it was widely believed that Henley had proposed to Maren sometime that year and that she had accepted. They were building a life together, dreaming of a future that balanced personal happiness with creative fulfillment. Henley's second solo album, Building the Perfect Beast, released in November 1984, reflected some of these tensions, the desire for connection amid a world increasingly dominated by technology and cynicism. Though Maren was less involved musically with this record compared to I Can't Stand Still, her emotional imprint was still felt in the background of Henley's evolving artistry. The couple split their time between Henley's property in Malibu and occasional trips to more secluded spots along the California coast, seeking reprieve from the ever-watchful eyes of the media. Yet even amid this tranquility, pressures loomed. Henley's career demands were intensifying. The success of singles like The Boys of Summer catapulted him into the forefront of the mid-1980s music scene. Touring, promotional obligations, and the constant pull of public life inevitably began to weigh on the relationship. Compounding these challenges was Maren's continued struggle with her health. Although she made progress in managing her Epstein-Barr symptoms, the lingering effects made it difficult for her to participate fully in the fast-paced, high-pressure world that Henley inhabited. By late 1985, cracks began to show. Friends close to the couple noticed that they were spending less time together. While there was no singular dramatic event that caused the split, it became clear that Henley and Maren were moving in different directions. Their engagement quietly dissolved around early 1986. It was a deeply painful decision for both, made with mutual sadness rather than bitterness. Henley, who had envisioned a future with Maren, found himself once again grappling with the emotional fallout of a relationship that had seemed so promising. Yet, remarkably, they remained close friends after their breakup. They continued to support each other's dreams and causes. When Henley founded the Walden Woods Project in 1990, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving the Walden Woods area in Massachusetts, made famous by transcendentalist writer Henry David Thoreau, Maren Jensen was among the first to offer her support. Maren's post-acting life was just as dynamic and inspiring. After stepping away from Hollywood, she co-founded Stila Cosmetics in the 1990s, a brand that quickly rose to prominence in the beauty industry. Meanwhile, Henley continued to build on his legacy, both musically and socially, with albums like The End of the Innocents in 1989 and his ongoing advocacy for environmental and educational causes. However, after all these years, Henley did find lasting love, the love of his life. In early 1994, when Don Henley was 46 years old and riding a second wave of fame thanks to the success of The End of the Innocents and the Eagles' long-awaited Hell Freezes Over reunion, fate introduced him to the woman who would transform his life in a way no one before had. Her name was Sharon Summerall, a strikingly beautiful former model from Texas. Born and raised in a small town in the Lone Star State, Sharon had carved out a notable career for herself in the fashion capitals of the world, working for prestigious agencies like Elite and Ford in the 1980s. She had the tall, elegant poise that made her an instant standout on runways in New York, Paris, and Milan, yet beneath her glamorous exterior was a grounded, private soul, far removed from the chaotic world of celebrity. Their first meeting in Los Angeles in 1994 was one of those serendipitous encounters that felt almost fated. At the time, Sharon was 32 years old, and though she had stepped away from full-time modeling, she still carried an effortless grace that caught Henley's attention immediately. Their worlds might have seemed disparate, but something between them clicked in an instant. However, there was a sobering reality hanging in the background that could have deterred a lesser man. Just before meeting Henley, Sharon had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic and unpredictable neurological disease that threatened her future with uncertainty. Rather than shying away, Henley leaned in. For a man who had written so often about the fragility of life, trust, and love, Sharon's situation seemed only to deepen his commitment. In many ways, Henley, who had spent much of his career grappling with themes of disillusionment and moral decay, found in Sharon a kind of pure, unwavering loyalty and strength that resonated deeply with him. Where past relationships had faltered under the glare of fame or the strain of competing ambitions, his bond with Sharon blossomed because it was built on something sturdier: shared values, mutual care, and a profound understanding that life could change at any moment. By the end of 1994, it was clear to both Henley and Sharon that theirs was not going to be a fleeting romance. They grew close quickly, with Henley often retreating from the public eye to spend long, quiet stretches of time with Sharon at his property in Malibu. There, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, they built a life of quiet rituals and deep conversation, far removed from the turbulence that had marked many of Henley's previous relationships. Sharon's illness, while serious, did not dominate their relationship. Instead, it added an urgency and sincerity to their love, a mutual acknowledgement that every moment together was precious. After a year of courtship, Henley proposed. The couple married on May 20, 1995, in a lavish yet deeply personal ceremony at Henley's ranch in Santa Monica Mountains near Malibu. The guest list reflected Henley's iconic status in the music industry, featuring luminaries like Bruce Springsteen, Sting, Billy Joel, Sheryl Crow, Glenn Frey, Don Felder, and Joe Walsh. All four original Eagles members attended, setting aside old tensions to celebrate their bandmates' happiness. Jackson Browne performed, and Tony Bennett sang, marking the occasion with the timeless elegance it deserved. The wedding was as much a reflection of Henley's journey as it was a celebration of the new chapter he was about to embark upon, a transition from the restless seeker to a man who had finally found his harbor. Sharon's presence stabilized Henley in ways that were immediately apparent to those who knew him well. Friends noted that he seemed calmer and more centered. He spoke openly about wanting a family, something he had never prioritized during the years of intense touring and recording with the Eagles. True to his word, Don and Sharon started a family not long after their marriage. They went on to have 3 children together, a daughter, Annabelle, and 2 sons, Will and Henry. Fatherhood transformed Henley further, infusing his music and public persona with a sense of responsibility and introspection that went beyond the introspective musings of his earlier solo work. Meanwhile, Sharon's battle with multiple sclerosis remained part of their lives, though not in the forefront. Henley, ever protective of their privacy, rarely spoke about Sharon's health publicly, choosing instead to shield his family from the media spotlight. In interviews where he did address it, he spoke only in the most loving and respectful terms, praising Sharon's strength, grace, and resilience. He also quietly supported medical research into multiple sclerosis, making donations and lending his name to fundraising efforts without fanfare, consistent with the quieter, more grounded existence he and Sharon cultivated together. Their life together in the hills above Malibu was one of understated elegance. The Henley family home was not the stereotypical rock star mansion, but a carefully curated retreat, complete with a vineyard, organic gardens, and sprawling views of the mountains and ocean. Henley became almost as much a farmer as a musician, working the land, teaching his children to appreciate nature, and devoting himself to conservation efforts. Sharon, though largely out of the public eye, was the beating heart of this new life, a steady, loving force that allowed Henley to finally live the values he had so often sung about. As the years passed, their bond only deepened. Henley's later works, including Inside Job and Cass County, often reflected a maturity and rootedness that critics and fans alike attributed, at least in part, to his home life with Sharon. Gone was the anger that had characterized some of his earlier solo efforts. In its place was a quieter but no less potent reflection on family, mortality, and the passage of time. Sharon's influence was not just personal but artistic, providing Henley with a wellspring of stability and love from which to create. Most impressively, in an industry littered with broken marriages and fleeting liaisons, Henley and Sharon have endured. They have weathered the inevitable challenges of life, such as health battles, career ups and downs, and the raising of children in a complicated world, not through spectacle, but through steadfast devotion. Unlike so many celebrity couples whose love stories unfold in tabloid headlines, Don and Sharon's story has been largely written in private, away from the noise, on their own terms. Well, love finds a way indeed. There is a happy ending to this saga after all. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.